Strings in JavaScript can be compared, meaning we can tell if one string is less than, greater than, or equal to another string. Let's see how that works. Now that we've seen how to create and get the properties of strings, there's one more thing that we'll generally do with strings very often, and that is compare them. When we compare two strings, what we're asking is whether the two strings are equal, or whether one string has a greater value than another string. Let's begin with testing for equality of strings. So I've commented out our previous code so we have fewer console.logs to sift through while we're experimenting with JavaScript strings. In order to test the equality of two strings, first we need to have two strings, and then we're going to use the equals operator. So let's grab two strings. Let's grab our first string, and we'll say hello. And our second string, we'll do a lowercase hello. And the way we can test for equality is simply by doing this. We're going to do it in the context of an if statement. So we'll say if first equals 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 second. The three equals here means is equal to, and more specifically, it means is strictly equal to. There is another similar operator in JavaScript, which is two equal signs. The difference between two equal signs and three equal signs is that when you use only two equal signs, is that JavaScript will sometimes change the type of one of the operands if it will allow it to match the other operand. So for instance, you might be able to compare a string with the number 13 in it to the actual number 13, and the double equals would return true, but the triple equals will only return true if both sides are strings and they are equivalent strings. So we're going to use three equal signs whenever we want to do this. This will help reduce errors in our JavaScript programs. So in our if statement, we'll say console.log, these strings are equal. And we'll put an else clause here. And we'll say console.log, the strings are different. So right now we're comparing first, which is the string hello with a capital H, to second, which is hello with a lowercase h. So what is the expected result? Well, let's save this out, return to our browser, and we'll refresh. And we'll see that the strings are different. And that's because first and second are two different strings, because first has a capital H and second has a lowercase h. So the equality operator takes into account the differences in case in the letters. They'll only be equal if they are the exact same letters in the same case. Now sometimes we want to compare strings without being sensitive to the case. The best way to handle this is to use the methods that we saw earlier, either to uppercase or to lowercase. Generally, to lowercase is used in this use case, so let's try this out. So what we'll do is we'll take our first string and call the to lowercase method. And now the left-hand side will be whatever the first string was, but all lowercase. And to be safe, we'll do the other side as well, to lower case. And now what we have is a comparison of the strings that is insensitive to the case of the letters inside of those strings. So if we save that out and refresh, we see now that the strings are equal. So anytime that you want to do a string comparison that is insensitive to case, the easiest way is to lowercase both of the strings you are comparing. Now, besides the equality operator, there are four other comparisons we can use between strings. This includes less than, greater than, less than or equal to, and greater than or equal to. The difference between less than and less than or equal to is that less than will only return true if the left-hand side is less than the right-hand side. However, less than or equal to will return true if the left-hand side is less than the right-hand side, or if the two sides are equal. So let's just focus on less than right now, because less than is the opposite of greater than, and it's pretty easy to understand how the JavaScript strings will be evaluated once you understand less than. So what I've done here is I've created a function called compare, and this is just to help us experiment with the different ways strings will compare to each other. It simply takes two strings, and it will console.log both a message describing those strings with a less than between them, and the second argument is the actual comparison of A is less than B. So let's try out a few strings. We'll use the compare function we just created, and let's compare the string lowercase a to the string lowercase b. Now this will print out true if the string a is in fact less than the string b. And based on the alphabetical order, we would expect that to be true. So let's try it out. So if we refresh, a is less than b is true. So what would happen if we took a lowercase a and compared it to an uppercase a? Let's check it out in the browser. And we'll see lowercase a less than uppercase a is false. And that's because of the way strings are encoded and compared. Any uppercase letter is always going to be less than any lowercase letter. That's because the characters that we use in our string are roughly based on the ASCII table. This ASCII table assigns each character that could be in our string a value. And when we compare strings, it uses the values of each of those characters to compare them. So if we were to look inside of this table for the lowercase a, we'll see its decimal value is equivalent to 97, where the uppercase a is equivalent to the decimal value 65. That's why a lowercase a would actually be greater than an uppercase a. And this type of comparison will work for all the characters that we see here. For instance, an open square bracket would be less than a closing square bracket. So we can compare more than single characters. We can compare longer strings, like compare apples to oranges. And the way the comparison will be created is JavaScript will look at the first character in each string. If the first character of the left-hand side is less than the first character of the right-hand side, then less than is true. It only needs to go to the subsequent letters if the letters it's looked at so far are equivalent. For example, comparing apples to applications. What will determine which is greater or which is less than will actually be the E in apples and the I in applications. And we can see what the results would be here. Both of them, apples, come before applications, because in apples versus oranges, A comes before O, and in apples versus applications, E comes before I. Now what happens if one string is a substring of the other? For instance, if we compare app to apples. We can see that the comparison would go through A, P, and P. However, the left-hand side runs out of letters, meaning that the left-hand side is smaller than the right-hand side. So finally, if we do compare two of the same strings, like hello and hello, we'll see once again that hello is not less than hello because they are equal. However, if we modified our compare function instead to use less than or equal to, both in our description and our actual comparison, we'll see that hello is less than or equal to hello because hello and hello are equal. And that is the only way that less than and less than or equal to are different. Conversely, greater than and greater than or equal to will work the same way as we've seen, only in the reverse order. So now you should be familiar with strings in JavaScript. There's still more to learn, but we'll be seeing more about strings as we learn about the other types in JavaScript.